Hello friends, in today's video we're going to be discussing Dapper, which is a lightweight ORM which we can integrate within our .NET Web API. In this video we're going to be adding Dapper and configuring it inside our Web API and utilizing it within our controller. With that we're going to be also comparing it with an Entity Framework implementation and see how do they differ and how do they resemble. If you like this video and you would like to learn more about .NET, AWS or Azure, please make sure you subscribe. Now let's jump into the code. So what I have here is I have a very simple Web API. This Web API contains two controllers, actually three controllers, and it has an implementation of Redis. It's a very simple implementation that we have created in a previous video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run the API and we're going to be taking a look at it. So as we can see here, I have a very simple CRUD operation where I'm able to actually get the cars and I'm able to see all of the information. I can post, get, and put. So let's see now what's under the cover of this Web API and how do they work. And then we're going to be seeing how we can add Dapper to it and replace Entity Framework with Dapper. So if we go back to the source code, I'm going to stop my application here and we take a look at the program.cs. As we can see here, I have two main things. I have my DB contacts, which is assigned to my API DB contacts, and it uses SQLite. And this API DB contacts, if we go to it, we'll be able to see that here I'm utilizing my Entity Framework DB contacts. And within this, I'm able to manage everything regarding my database within this single DB context. As well, I have some services which allow me to do so. So as we can see here, I have my car service, which utilize the DB contents where I can actually do all of the CRUD operation. I can utilize Entity Framework with Link in order for me to do all of the queries that I need. And I have an interface which allows me to utilize this. And this service is being injected inside my program.cs using the scoped service in order for me to be able to utilize it inside my controller. So it's a pretty straightforward implementation of an Entity Framework within a Web API. In today's video, we're going to be seeing how we can actually add Dapper and replace this Entity Framework with Dapper. So let's get started. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to install a couple of packages. So I'm going to go to my terminal and I'm going to type the following: nat add package Dapper. Now that this has been installed successfully, I'm going to clear it up. I'm going to install a different package, which is going to be .NET add package Microsoft.data.sql client. Now we can see those two has been installed. If I go to my CS Pro, as you can see here, I have them installed. Now I have my Dapper and my SQLite available for me to utilize. Perfect. So now that this is all up and running, what I want to do is I want to start by creating my services. So inside my data service, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new data service. I'm going to call it Dapper. Actually, let's call it API Dapper context. So we can just separate. So within this here, what I'm going to do is first I'm going to utilize the configuration in order for me to read my connection string. So we're going to put private read only by configuration, and I'm going to initialize it through the constructor. And now this way I'm able to access my configuration. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my connection. And with this, basically what I'm doing is I'm utilizing the Microsoft.data.sqlite reference in order for me to create a connection string, or basically a connection to my SQLite database. And basically, as we can see, it's a pretty simple implementation. I have my SQLite connection here. I have my configuration here. And here it's referring to the default connection. So now that I have created the capabilities to connect to my database, I would just like to mention one thing here. So within Entity Framework, we follow the code first approach model where we create the database and basically we manage it from there. In this example right now, I'm going to be assuming the database has been created and I'm just going to create the CRUD operation for it. So I'm not going to be going through how to create the database with Dapper and how to manage it and handle it from there. What I'm going to do here right now is just going to create the operations. So it's going to allow me to interact with my database, like the add, update, delete, etc. So now that I have my contacts in place, what I want to do inside my services, I'm going to add a new directory and I'm going to call it Dapper. Actually, let's call it Dapper Services or Dapper ORM, something like that. And the reason I'm doing this, I just want to compare both of them within the implementation. You don't really have to do that. And here inside, I'm going to create a new interface and I'm going to call it iCar Dapper Service, or basically D service. Yes, and I'm going to create another one as well, which is going to be the implementation. So car D service, and this will implement the iCar D service. Perfect. So now inside my iCar D service, I'm going to create my methods that I'm going to be utilizing. So these are going to be pretty straightforward. First one is going to be a task car. Now we need to fix the reference. And this one is going to be get car by ID async, and it's going to require the ID. The second one is going to be get all cars async. Also, it's going to turn us a list of cars. Then what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be adding the car. And as you can see here, I'm returning an integer rather than returning a boolean, because basically with Dapper we're doing SQL commands, and that SQL command will return to us a number. We're going to be seeing this in more details within the implementation. Then what we're going to be doing here, we're going to be adding the update for our car, and basically we're going to take the ID and the car object, and then we're going to be returning the value of it. So if it's more than 0 or 1, we're going to see that in the implementation. And lastly, we're going to be doing the delete car, which has the same concept. So now that I have created my service, what I'm going to do is inside my implementation, I'm just going to implement the missing members. And now we can see here that our .NET application is happy, but we did not really implement anything. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to connect to my new context. So I'm going to put private read-only API Dapper context underscore API Dapper context, or we're just going to call it context. It's easier. And we're going to be utilizing the constructor injection. So it will be initialized, and this is now initialized. And now what I want to do is I want to start by something pretty straightforward, and it's just going to be get all cars async. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this async. Let's make all of them async, so we can avoid sometimes typing it again and again. And now let's try with implementing this. So I'm going to delete this. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to get the DB connection. And to do this, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be relying on the using for the connection. So what we're doing here is we're initializing the API DB contacts, and we're utilizing the create connection that we have created, which is this one here, which initialize a new SQLite connection. And with that, what we're doing is we're storing it inside this variable called connection, and we're utilizing the using statement in order for us to manage the life cycle of that connection that we have. So with that, we're basically doing the dispose of the connection once it's finished, and we're using it as an inline rather than having the brackets all set up for it. So now that we have the connection open, in order for us to get all car async, now we need to write our SQL query, and this SQL query is going to be pretty straightforward, where we have a simple select star from cars. And when we do the select star from cars, we're basically writing a pure vanilla SQL, which is going to be utilized in order for us to get the information from our database. So now that we have done that and created the query, the next step for us is we're going to be executing the query. And now in order for us to do so, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be returning the connection. So we're going to be also still relying on the connection that we have creating, and we're going to be executing query async. Query async mean here is going to be taking whatever SQL that we have provided here, a SQL command, and it's going to execute it. And we're going to tell it that whatever response that you're going to be getting, you're going to be returning it in a list of type cars, of I in cars. And that's as simple as it gets. So what we're doing here is we're simply just taking this command, executing it, whatever the result we're getting back, we're storing it in a list of cars. And this is as simple as it gets here. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be implementing the rest. So let's start by implementing the get car by ID async. So we're going to do the same thing, where we're going to take the connection, and then we're going to be writing the SQL. So here within the SQL query, what we're doing is we're telling it basically we need to do a select statement, and we're specifying the condition where the ID will need to match this ID. And once we have written our SQL, then what we're doing here is we are basically relying again on our connection that we have, and we're using the query single or default async. And this implementation here, what it's doing, it's allowing us to return a single value from our information or from our database back to the query, and then basically from that we're able to process it. So as we can see here with the other one, which is gonna be query async, it's returning us a list. On the other hand, the query single or default is getting us a single result, and we're telling it that this result, it has to be of type car. We're passing in the query that we have created, and because we are utilizing parameters, and this is how we pass the parameters for it. So it's a pretty simple implementation, and this will allow us also to get the car by ID. So now that we have covered the main two items when it comes to getting, now we still have three other ones, which is to complete the full CRUD operation, which is adding, updating, and deleting. So again, pretty straightforward when it comes to adding the car. We're gonna first start by implementing the connection. Once we have the connection open, what now we need to is we need to create the query, which is going to allow us to update the connections, and then we're going to be executed. So as we can see here, again, we're creating a SQL statement, and within the SQL statement, what we're doing is we're creating a pure vanilla query into our application, where basically we're doing the answered into statement, we're specifying the information that we want, and we're passing the value. Again, we're writing simple SQL here. We're not utilizing entity framework by any way, shape, or form. And now that this is in place, what we're doing is we're basically utilizing the execute async, because basically we're not reading here, we're executing a command against our database. So we're utilizing the execute async functionality, and this will allow us to get a response as an integer. So if we got the response or an integer equal to 0, it means the execution has failed. If we get anything other than that, it means it has succeeded, and it will showcase the number of records that has been updated. So if the number of records are 0, it means it did not work. But if it's anything other than that, it means it has worked. And lastly, we are returning the results. So with that, what we're going to be doing now, from adding a car to actually updating it and deleting it, which is again going to follow the same structure. We're going to get a connection, and then once we get the connection, we are able now to write the query. And this query basically now, we have the model, make, year, color, and the ID. And this is basically we're telling it that you need to update the row inside the database based on this ID and the information that you're going to be updating. So now once we have done that, we're going to be using the same command as the answer. So we can put, now we need to execute the query. We could var result equal await connection.execute async. We're going to pass the SQL as well. We're going to be passing the parameters, which is going to be car. As simple as that. So now that we have this, the last item that we want to do, actually we need to return the result. So we're going to put return result here. And for the last one, we're going to be also following the same structure where we're going to be getting the connection first. So let's remove this, get the connection. And now what we're going to be doing is we need to delete the query, and it's going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to utilize the delete command from cars, and then we're going to be passing the condition based on the ID. And lastly, we're going to be executing it now. So we're going to put var result equal await connection.execute async. We're going to pass the SQL and the SQL, and we're gonna pass the parameter, which is gonna be of type new, and this is gonna be the parameter object, and we're gonna say it's gonna be ID. And as we've done before, we're gonna be returning the result. And this is basically it. This is how we can create a very simple service utilizing Dapper in order for us to create a CRUD operation into our database. This implementation is very straightforward, and it would allow us to basically utilize the power of Dapper in order for us to do so. So now that we have done this, the next step is I'm gonna go to my program.cs and I'm gonna inject this here. So what I need to do here is I need to inject my API Dapper context. So I'm gonna put builder.services.add singleton because I want it to be available when the application initializes. And I'm gonna say here it's gonna be API Dapper context. And this will allow me to initialize my connection to my database utilizing Dapper. So this is for Dapper. And then what I wanna do after this is I wanna actually initialize my services, which is gonna be my iCard service. So here is gonna be again builder.services.add scope, and here we're gonna pass my interface, which is gonna be the iCard service, and we're gonna pass the implementation card service. And that should be it when it comes to initialization. With this, we initialized our API DB context, and we initialized the cards itself, the services for the cards itself. So now that this is all up and ready, now what we need to do is I'm just gonna go back to my controllers, and I'm gonna be creating a new controller. I'm gonna call it cards Dapper controller. And just to make life easy for myself, I'm just gonna copy paste these and add them here. And I'm gonna change this, of course, but just so I can avoid some manual typing. So now what I want to do here first, I'm gonna update the constructor name, and I don't want to use the iCard service. I want to utilize the iCard service, and similarly I want to inject it here, and I'm just gonna call it car service for now. So now that I have done this, then I'm gonna go back to my controls, and I'm gonna copy everything from my existing endpoints, which currently utilize entity framework, and I'm gonna be updating them to utilize the Dapper ones. So now if we take a look at that, it's almost the same thing. So get all car async, it's gonna work the same thing. Get car by ID is gonna do the same thing. Now for this one, it's gonna be a bit different. So now we're gonna be doing for the creating of the car, whenever the car is successfully created, we're getting the integer number which says if it's successful or not. And if it is successful, we're not returning the entire thing. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be saying if created car bigger than 0, we're going to be returning created car, which means that it has passed everything. Else I'm going to return bad request. It means something has gone wrong. And actually we can say, yeah, car was not created. It's just a simple demonstration. I don't want to really go into a lot of the detail of the best practices and so on and so forth. Similarly to the put, we can see everything works. Here it should not be equal to null because we're getting an ID. So we're saying if it is returned to 0, then the update the car is not worked. So we can say bad request rather than not found. And we can say here car not updated. And lastly, for the deleting the car, same logic. If it's equal to 0, we're going to put bad request. And we're going to say here that the car has not been deleted. And instead of returning OK here, I'm just going to be returning no content. Whenever we do types of delete, and also for update, I'm going to be returning no content. Okay, perfect. So now that I have done this, now let's run my application and see what's going to happen. Now, if I go to my web browser, I'm going to refresh this. Now we can see here, now I have cars, which basically gets the information from Entity Framework. And we have cars Dapper, which takes the information through Dapper. And we have one for caching, which is what I covered previously regarding Redis. So now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be seeing the cars Dapper. We're going to click on execute and we got the information back. So what I'm going to do also here is I'm going to add a breaking point inside my implementation. So we'll be able to see it step by step how it works. So I'm going to execute it again and we're going to go back to Rider. And inside Rider, we can see here that the requests have stopped, or basically on the breaking point, it has stopped. And if I jump over this, now we can see here that my connection is here and I got my connection. And then basically now I have my SQL command and now we're executing it. Now if I jump back, we can see I got back the response. And if I want to go a step even deeper, I'm just going to put another breaking point here. So we'll be able to see the response coming back before it show it to us here. So now if we go back again to Rider, click on play, and we can see here we got the 2 cars. So now let's execute one of the other item inside my CRUD here. So let's say I want to add a car, try it out. I'm going to remove the ID because it's going to be auto-generated for me. As for the make, I'm going to put Mercedes. As for the model, let's put the AMG one here, 2023, and the color of course is going to be black. And I'm going to click on execute. Now we can see we got a 201. And now if I click on get cars, again, it's going to take me to Rider because I have added that breaking point, but let's skip it for now. And if we come back, we can see it has worked successfully. And everything else here should also be working. So if I come back to get a car, specify the ID of 3, which is the latest one, click on execute, we got the AMG one, which I have just added. And if I want to update, I can specify the ID. Let's say I want to update again the 3rd one, and I'm going to change it to, let's say, Mercedes model AMG 1 year 2023, but the color I want to make it silver, so I can put here silver. Click on execute. We can see we got a 204, which means it has been processed because we have returned no content. And now if I do select all, we should be able to see that it has changed color to silver. Again, the breaking point are here. Let's go back to our web browser, and now we can see it has become silver. And lastly, if I try to delete, again, try it out, put the ID 3 and click on delete. Again, we got a 201. Once I execute, it's going to take me back to Rider. I'm going to be removing now my my breaking point. So let's remove them. So now if we click on this, click on execute, and let's remove this as well. Click on OK, go back here. We can see we only got 2 cars left, which is perfect. So now we can see how easy it is. Dapper makes it for us to integrate. We can see how lightweight it is. We don't really have all of the overheads that Entity Framework has, and it will give us the flexibility to write way more complex querying with minimal less time. But everything has its pros and cons. So with Dapper, we need to make sure that we are writing our own SQL. There is no validation of our SQL. If the SQL query, once it's executed, there is no state to manage that. We cannot actually do state management for every single query. And basically, we have to, there is no autocomplete, and there's no the support that Entity Framework provides us. So there is a lot of benefits and there's a lot of disadvantage of using Dapper. It all depends on the use case. I cannot say this is better than the other one because everyone has a different use case when implementing an ORM. But from my own point of view, I would recommend Dapper if you're utilizing microservices because it's very lightweight and does not really take a lot of time to initialize, and it will not affect the performance of a microservice. If you're having a web API, I would recommend using a combination, Entity Framework for some items and Dapper for another items if you're utilizing the CQRS model. So there there's a lot of different ways where you can combine these two methodologies together and utilize them. This has been a very quick introduction on Dapper and how you can actually utilize it inside your web API. If you have any questions, please make sure you put them in the comments down below. If you have any suggestions, please also make sure you put them in the comments down below. If you'd like to have access to the source code, please make sure you support me on Patreon. With that said, please make sure you like and subscribe, and thank you very much for watching and have a great day.